Right now, your mind may be trapped in the sharp, vibrating echo of a conversation that ended hours ago. Perhaps the room around you is entirely dark. The world outside has slowed to a crawl. But inside your chest, a difficult exchange is still playing on an endless, agonizing loop. You might find yourself replaying a critical word, a cold glance, or an unresolved misunderstanding, constructing brilliant late arguments to defend your dignity to a person who is no longer there. It is exhausting to hold your worth upright against a memory, to feel your muscles tighten beneath the sheets as you try to fix an interaction that has already left the physical world. Your body wants the heavy safety of sleep, yet your thoughts keep pacing the floor of that unsettling social encounter, trying to force a different ending from a script that is already written. Let the weight of your frame sink a little deeper into the mattress, noticing how the cool air of the late evening moves softly across your skin, entirely indifferent to the words that hurt you. There is no need to resolve that disagreement before you can rest, and you do not have to convince anyone of your goodness to deserve a peaceful night. If it feels right, let your hands loosen their grip on the fabric of your blanket, allowing your fingers to uncurl and rest open beside you. The humid night air is thick and still, carrying the faint, earthy scent of distant rain, a quiet reminder that the earth is vast and completely unbothered by human friction. You are not broken because a harsh conversation has left you feeling exposed or misunderstood. What you are experiencing right now is not a personal failure, but the natural resonance of a sensitive mind that has been struck by a heavy blow. Tonight, we are not going to force your thoughts to become instantly silent, nor will we try to violently banish the memories that keep you awake. We are simply going to change how we sit with the vibration, learning how to let the sound move through you until it naturally runs out of air. The mind does not find lasting peace by winning every mental argument or by forcing the rest of the world to understand your heart perfectly. True inner stillness arrives when you realize that a difficult word only has the power to echo for as long as you provide a rigid wall for it to strike. When someone speaks sharply to you, or when an interaction leaves an unsettling question hanging in the air, it is like a mallet striking a heavy brass bell. The original remark is just a single, brief impact, a moment that passes in a flash of seconds. Yet, we lie awake for days afterward, providing a tight, defensive surface that keeps that initial blow bouncing back and forth, turning a temporary sound into a permanent, deafening hum. Overthinking is often fear, masquerading as protection, a desperate attempt by the ego to build a fortress out of old conversations, so we can never be surprised by pain again. But the fortress we build to defend our dignity frequently becomes the very chamber that traps the noise inside, keeping the heart in a state of perpetual, exhausting friction. Take a slow, unhurried breath in through the nose, letting the cool air fill the lower belly, and let it go with a long, soft sigh through the lips, making absolutely no effort to control what happens next. Nothing is required of you right now. No answers must be found, and no relationships need to be repaired in this darkness. You are entirely safe enough to soften the rigid muscles around your eyes, to let your jaw drop slightly away from your teeth, and to give up the heavy burden of being your own defender for the rest of the night. In a moment, this journey will take us to a quiet valley foundry, where the air smells of charcoal, where an old bell founder shows an exhausted young apprentice why some sounds refuse to die down. This story will show us something much quieter than a perfect defense, offering a gentle pathway into a space where words lose their edges and the mind can finally rest. For many months, a young monk named Junsuke had lived in a state of quiet, agonizing unrest, his mind resembling a stormy sea whenever he tried to close his eyes at night. His trouble had begun during a humid afternoon in the village square, where he had been sent by his monastery to oversee the trading of grain with the local merchants. An older administrator, irritated by a minor error in the accounting scales, had reprimanded Junsuke harshly in front of a shifting crowd of strangers, questioning his focus, his dedication, and his suitability for the monastic path. The words had been sharp, cutting through the heavy summer air like a blade, leaving Junsuke standing in absolute silence, while his face burned with a sudden, overwhelming shame. The market had eventually cleared. The administrator had forgotten the incident by nightfall. But for Junsuke, the conversation had never truly ended. Every evening when he lay down upon his thin straw mat in the great drafty meditation hall, the words would return to him with the weight of an iron hammer. He would find himself lying perfectly still, his eyes wide open, staring up into the high wooden rafters, while his chest tightened into a hard, defensive knot. In the dark, he would reconstruct the market square with vivid, painful clarity, inventing fierce, eloquent defenses that he should have spoken to protect his honor. He would re-examine the administrator's tone, analyzing every subtle shift in the man's expression, trying to figure out if he was truly as incompetent as the criticism implied. The more he fought against the memory, the louder the insults seemed to echo within his ears, vibrating through his shoulders and keeping his body in a state of high, exhausting vigilance. He was deeply tired, but the mental echo chamber refused to grant him even a single hour of uninterrupted peace. One night, when the heat in the dormitory became completely unbearable and the loop of old conversations felt like a physical weight pressing down on his throat, Junsuke quietly rose from his mat. He slipped through the heavy wooden doors of the hall and walked down the winding stone path that led toward the lower valley, where the monastery's iron and bronze foundry sat near a rushing stream. Even at midnight, the faint, warm glow of a dying charcoal kiln cast long, amber shadows across the courtyard, and the air carried the rich, grounded scent of scorched earth and cooled metal. There, sitting on a low wooden bench near a massive, newly cast temple bell, was Master Koshin, the old bell founder, whose hands were permanently stained with the dark dust of carbon and clay. The old man was not working. He was simply sitting in the absolute stillness of the valley, holding a small, unpolished copper handbell between his calloused fingers, watching the night mist drift over the water. Junsuke approached slowly, his sandaled feet making a soft, scraping sound on the packed dirt, his head bowed under the invisible weight of his sleeplessness. Master Koshin did not look up immediately, but he motioned with a slight tilt of his chin for the young monk to sit beside him on the weathered wood. For a long time, neither of them spoke, the only sound being the distant, rhythmic lap of the stream against the smooth river stones and the occasional soft pop of a dying ember in the kiln. The silence was immense. Yet, inside Junsuke's mind, the harsh words of the administrator were still humming like an angry swarm of bees, making his breathing shallow and his posture rigid. Master Koshin turned the small copper bell over in his hands, its rough surface catching the dim orange light of the embers, and he looked into the apprentice's exhausted, heavy eyes. He raised the handbell by its small wooden handle, holding it level with Junsuk's chest, and with a sudden, deliberate flick of his fingernail, he struck the outer rim of the metal. A sharp, clear, high-pitched note immediately pierced the midnight air, filling the small courtyard with a vibrant, ringing tone that seemed to cut straight through the natural quiet of the valley. Junsuk blinked, his focus drawn entirely to the sound which hung in the space between them, refusing to dissolve. The old master held the bell completely still in the air, letting the high frequency vibrate through the wood of the handle, its hum lingering long after the initial strike had passed. He looked at Junsuka and asked softly, his voice dropping into the low register of the night, if he could stop the sound from ringing without crushing the copper or breaking the handle. Juns hesitated, his tired mind scrambling to find a complex, philosophical meaning behind the request before he reached out a hesitant hand. He grabbed the body of the vibrating bell with his whole fist, gripping the metal with immense force, his knuckles turning white as he tried to strangle the sound out of existence. The ringing stopped instantly, but the sharp vibration drove itself directly into the bones of Junsuk's fingers, causing a dull, uncomfortable ache to radiate up his wrist. He let go quickly, his palm tingling from the sudden friction, looking down at his hand with a mixture of confusion and frustration. Master Koshin smiled faintly, his dark hands resting loosely on his knees, and he struck the copper bell a second time, sending the exact same sharp, ringing frequency out into the humid night air. This time the old man did not ask Junsuk to grasp it with force, but instead reached out his own thumb and forefinger gently, placing just the fleshy pads of his skin against the very outer lip of the copper rim. He applied almost no pressure at all, his touch as light as a falling leaf meeting the surface of a pond. Yet the intense vibration ceased immediately, disappearing into the vast silence of the valley without a single sound. Junsuke watched in absolute stillness, noticing how the old master's hand remained completely soft, absorbing the energy of the strike without fighting the metal. And this is where the mind begins to soften. The tingling sensation in Junsuk's hand did not fade right away. He stood in the damp night air, watching the old bell founder's fingers rest lightly on the now silent copper rim. The tiny handbell hung between them, suspended by its simple ashwood handle, completely still again. The sharp, piercing note that had just filled the valley was gone, swallowed by the vast expanse of the surrounding hills, leaving only the faint scent of sulphur from the nearby hot springs and the steady, rhythmic breathing of the old man. Junsuk looked down at his own palm, which was still red from the desperate force he had used to squeeze the metal. He had thought that to kill a sound, one had to conquer it, to overpower the vibration with an equal measure of physical strength. Steve. Master Koshin quietly lowered the small bell onto the rough surface of the wooden bench. The wood was deeply grooved, dark with decades of charcoal dust and iron oil, catching the low amber glow of the dying kiln fire. The old man did not offer an immediate lecture, nor did he tell Junsuk that his heavy grip was a failure. He simply reached into a shallow woven basket beside his feet and pulled out a small, unpolished copper handbell, the very object that had just carried the stinging vibration. He did not hand it back to the apprentice instead. He laid it gently on its side, on the dark wood, allowing its hollow mouth to face the open sky. "Why do you think the sound lingered so long when it was first struck?" Koshin asked, his voice low and raspy, carrying the slow cadence of someone who spent his days waiting for metal to melt and solidify. Junsuk shifted his weight on the packed earth, his sandaled feet pressing into the cool dust. He thought of the administrator's harsh words in the market square, how they had seemed to grow louder every time he tried to push them out of his mind. He answered that the bell was made of thick, heavy copper, and that the force of the strike was simply too strong to dissolve quickly. The old founder shook his head slowly, his grey hair catching the faint light of a passing cloud. "The metal is only doing what metal must do. When it is solid and closed," he whispered. "The copper is dense, the walls are thick, and the shape is rigid. When the mallet strikes it, the energy has nowhere to go but back and forth, bouncing between the walls of the chamber, creating a hum that fills the entire room. The strength of the blow is not what keeps the sound alive, Junsuk. It is the rigidity of the bell itself. If the bell were made of soft clay, or if its edges were open and porous, the strike would find no place to bounce. It would pass straight through into the earth, leaving only silence behind." Junsuk knelt down on the cool earth, his eyes fixed on the small dark hollow of the copper bell. For 3 days, he had believed that his sleeplessness was caused entirely by the administrator's cruelty, by the first strike of the mallet in the crowded square. He had believed. If he could only build a stronger argument, or if he could find a way to prove his competence to the village merchants, the painful echo in his chest would finally stop. But looking at his own trembling hands, he realized that the administrator was miles away, sleeping deeply in his own bed, while he, Junsuke, was still carrying the heavy bronze chamber inside his own ribs, providing the rigid walls that kept the insult alive. The night air grew cooler, carrying the damp mist from the valley stream across the open courtyard of the foundry. Master Koshin picked up a small wooden rod, a simple tool used for checking the thickness of the clay molds, and handed it to the young monk. "Strike the bell again," the old man instructed softly, "but this time, do not try to stop the sound with your hands. Just watch where the vibration lives." Junsuk took the wooden rod, his fingers wrapping around the smooth, fire-blackened grain. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the familiar tightening in his stomach, the same physical resistance that arose whenever he remembered the burning shame in the market. He raised the rod and tapped the outer edge of the copper bell. The high, clear frequency, immediate, burst forth once more, humming through the quiet valley, vibrating against the stone walls of the kiln. This time, Junsuke did not reach out to strangle the metal. He sat completely still, his breath held tight in his throat, listening closely to the sound as it began to decay. He noticed that the note did not fade. In a straight line it pulsed, rising and falling like a tiny wave, shaking the air between his chest and the bench. He could feel the frequency, humming inside his own ears, matching the tight, anxious rhythm of his heart. The sound seemed to want to stay alive, clinging to the metal lip, desperate to find a surface to rest upon. "Look closer," Koshin murmured, leaning forward so that his breath stirred the white ash near the kiln. "Where does the sound go when it begins to die?" Junsuk leaned in, his vision adjusting to the dim, amber shadows. He could see the microscopic trembling of the copper rim, a faint blur. At the very edge of the metal, where the bronze met the open night air. As he watched, the vibration did not travel backward into the handle, nor did it break the copper. It simply widened, thinning out into the vast, humid space of the courtyard, losing its density as it encountered the soft, unmoving air of the valley. The sound was not being destroyed. It was being diluted by the immense silence that surrounded it. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over Junsuke, pulling his shoulders down away from his ears. The realization was not an intellectual thought, but a deep, physical letting go within his own muscles. The suffering he had carried for 3 nights was not the original scolding in the public square. The administrator had struck the bell only once, a single moment that had lasted no longer than the tap of the wooden rod. Every echo since then, every sleepless hour spent replaying the scene, had been Junsuke's own mind rebuilding the rigid copper walls, keeping the vibration trapped within his own body. He had been hurting himself with a ghost, using his own energy to keep the weapon moving. The old master reached out and took the wooden rod back from Junsuke's hand, placing it quietly in the basket. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter, but for now, let the image of that small copper bell rest upon the dark wood. Master Koshin closed his eyes, his breathing deepening into a slow, effortless rise and fall that seemed to sync with the movement of the mist over the stream. He did not tell Junsuke to go back to sleep, nor did he promise that the administrator would ever apologize. He simply allowed the stillness of the foundry to wash over them both. A vast, open reservoir of space that made the small, unpolished bell look completely insignificant in the dark. Junsuke sat on the earth, his legs crossed, his hands resting palms up on his knees, just as he had been taught in the meditation hall. But for the first time in many months, he was not trying to achieve a state of perfect concentration. He was not trying to banish the memory of the market, nor was he trying to force his mind to become a void. He was simply letting his chest become like the open mouth of the bell, porous, unresisting, allowing the cool night wind to pass completely through his body without finding any tight, defensive surface to shake. And this is where the mind begins to soften. This ancient story of the young monk and the bell founder is not telling us to stop feeling our lives, nor is it asking us to become cold and indifferent to the words of others. It is not an invitation to paint over our real human hurts with a forced smile, or to pretend that an insult does not sting. Buddhist wisdom is never a demand to freeze the heart into stone so that nothing can touch it. Instead, it is showing us something much quieter, something far more merciful. It is reminding us that the deep exhaustion we feel tonight does not come from the world striking us. It comes from the way the mind tries to contain, fight, and grip the strike long after the mallet has been put away. Think about your own day or the weeks that have brought you to this bed tonight. When someone treats you unfairly, ignores your worth, or projects their own bitterness onto you, that event is a single, sharp impact. It is a moment in time that arrives, flashes, and dissolves back into the past. Timeline of your life, that conversation might have lasted only 3 minutes, or perhaps a single hour. But when we carry that interaction into the darkness of our bedroom, when we lie under our blankets and repeat every syllable, we are building a rigid bronze wall inside our chest. We believe that by replaying the scene, we are somehow fixing it, protecting ourselves, or preparing a better defense for next time. We turn the original event into a permanent fixture of our inner house, giving it a heavy, solid body to bounce against over and over again. One of the greatest insights of the Buddha was that human suffering does not come from the simple pain that life brings. but from the extra weight the mind adds to that pain. In early teachings, this is often described as the arrow of reality and the arrow of the mind. The first wound is what happens to us. The cold remark, the sudden rejection, the unexpected misunderstanding. This first wound is like the mallet striking the copper bell. It is sharp, it is real, and it causes a natural flash of discomfort. But the second wound is entirely self-generated. The second wound is the endless internal trial we hold in the dark, the weeks of resentment, the frantic overthinking, and the desperate need to force the other person to see us clearly. The first arrow causes pain. The second arrow creates suffering. Buddhist wisdom does not promise that we can control the hands that throw the first arrow at us, but it reminds us that we are fully capable of refusing to shoot the second arrow into our own hearts. Maybe you have felt this tight grip in your own life, the exhausting tendency to turn a passing interaction into a permanent definition of who you are. In modern emotional terms, this is what the teachings mean when they speak of attachment and craving. Attachment is not a beautiful form of love. It is the rigid state of mind that says, I must have this person's approval, or I cannot be at peace. It is the tense expectation that demands the outer world must match our desires before our body is allowed to soften. When we crave validation from someone who is incapable of giving it, we are like an apprentice trying to strangle a vibrating bell with our bare hands. The tighter we squeeze the metal to force it into silence, the more the painful frequency drives itself into our muscles, leaving our bones aching with resentment. We think we are fighting the enemy outside, but we are actually trapping their vibration inside our own skin. Letting go does not mean that you disappear, or that you give up on your life, or that you allow others to mistreat you without consequence. True, letting go is simply the brave act of widening your inner borders so that the sharp word has nowhere to land. It means releasing the extra struggle, dropping the mental chisel that tries to reshape a conversation that has already passed. When you allow your mind to become spacious, like the open night air surrounding the foundry courtyard, you notice that thoughts are not commands that must be obeyed. They are merely temporary frequencies passing through your awareness. A memory can enter your mind in the dark without becoming the entire room. A painful sentence can flash across your awareness without requiring you to stand up and defend yourself against it. Awareness is the quiet, unmoving space that can notice the vibration of overthinking without becoming the overthinking itself. Right now, your chest is large enough to contain both the heavy echo of your day and the deep, silent stillness of the mattress beneath you. You do not have to choose between being perfectly healed or perfectly broken. You can simply be the space that observes the tension. When we practice compassion toward our own sensitive nature, we stop punishing ourselves for being affected by the world. We look at our overthinking not as a failure of our character, but as a tired, hypervigilant protector that is trying very hard to keep us safe from future rejection. We can look at this internal noise with a gentle, forgiving softness, acknowledging its presence without granting it the power to direct our breath or steal our rest. The suffering was never truly, in the original words, spoken to you. It was in the tight, defensive shape your mind took to receive them. If you look closely into the darkness of your room right now, you might realize that the person who hurt you is completely absent from this space. They are not breathing this air. They are not holding your shoulders tight. They are not preventing your eyelids from becoming heavy. The only thing alive in this room is the echo you are nurturing with your own vital energy. You have been using your own warmth to keep a cold memory alive. But just as the old bell founder showed Junsuka, the vibration does not have a soul of its own. It requires your resistance to stay audible. The moment you stop fighting the sound, the moment you allow your inner walls to melt into porous, open space, the frequency begins to dilute itself in the vastness of the night. Take comfort in the reality of impermanence, the simple, beautiful law that nothing in this universe stays fixed unless we build a cage around it. Every emotion is a temporary visitor. Every difficult conversation is a cloud that has already moved past the mountain peak. Your mind does not need to be repaired tonight because the space within you has never been broken by the noises that pass through it. The sky is never damaged by a passing thunderstorm, and the deep ocean is never altered by the ripples on its surface. You are the sky, not the storm. You are the ocean, not the wave. In a moment, this journey will show us a practical, physical way to let this spaciousness move from an idea into the very cells of your body, guiding your muscles into a deeper alignment with the quiet earth. But before we move into that gentle practice, let yourself absorb this one truth. You do not have to solve the puzzle of your life to be worthy of a soft pillow and an undisturbed sleep tonight. And this is where the mind begins to soften. Let the quiet of this moment settle around you like a cool garment. There is no need to rush into the next hour, and no expectation for you to become perfectly serene all at once. If it feels right, allow your awareness to drop away from the meaning of words and sink down into the physical landscape of your body as it rests right now. Notice where your shoulders meet the surface beneath you, feeling the simple, honest gravity that holds you without your assistance. You do not have to hold yourself up anymore. Tonight, the earth is entirely capable of carrying your weight, your fatigue, and the unresolved fragments of your day. Perhaps you can let your ankles roll outward just a fraction more, and let your shoulder blades widen, creating a tiny bit of extra space in the center of your chest. If it feels right, take a slow, unhurried breath in through your nose, drawing the cool air deep down into the base of your abdomen, and let it pass through your lips like a quiet evening breeze, moving through leaves. There is no need to count the breaths, nor is there any virtue in forcing the air into a rigid rhythm. We are not trying to change how you breathe. We are simply noticing that you are being breathed. With each slow exhaling sigh, you might imagine that the outer rim of your mind is softening just a small amount, like bronze that has been touched by a gentle warmth, allowing its tight structure to relax into the dark. As you lie here in the stillness, you might become aware of one specific conversation, one critical sentence, or one heavy worry that has been demanding your attention tonight. Do not try to push this memory out of your room, and do not judge yourself for carrying it into your bed. Shaming yourself for overthinking is only another way of striking the metal, adding a fresh vibration to an already tired instrument. Instead, look at this repetitive thought with a sense of gentle curiosity. What does it feel like inside your physical body when this memory rings through you? Perhaps there is a slight tightness in the back of your throat, a subtle heat behind your eyes, or a heavy coiled knot right in the pit of your stomach. Even noticing these small sensations is enough. You do not have to dissolve them or fix them to be safe here. Imagine, if you will, that this persistent worry is a small, unpolished copper handbell resting right in the center of your chest. This bell represents the emotional pattern that has kept you awake, the habitual need to defend your dignity, the impulse to replay old scenes to make yourself feel secure, the long-standing habit of providing a rigid wall for painful words to strike. See the rough texture of its metal, dark with the soot of old conflicts, its lip cold and hard against your skin. For hours, your mind has been grabbing this bell with a tight, desperate fist, trying to strangle the sound, only to find that the fierce grip causes your entire frame to ache with exhaustion. Right now, if it feels right, let your internal hand completely uncurl from that metal handle. You do not have to destroy this bell, and you do not have to throw it away into the dark. Simply let it rest, flat, upon the floor of your chest, its hollow mouth open toward the vast, silent space of your awareness. Instead of gripping it, imagine that you are gently placing just the soft, warm pads of your fingers against the very outer lip of its copper rim, just as Master Koshin did in the Quiet Valley Foundry. You are applying absolutely no pressure at all. Your touch is merely a gentle, uncritical witness to the vibration. You are simply telling the tension, I see you. I know you are tired, and you are allowed to run out of air. As your awareness rests lightly on the edge of this feeling, notice what happens to the frequency of your overthinking. Without the walls of your resistance to bounce against, the sharp edges of those critical words begin to blur, slightly in the dark. The vibration doesn't break it, simply widens, moving outward from the center of your chest, passing through your ribs, through your skin, and entering the cool night air of the room. The memory is losing its density, turning from a heavy piece of cast bronze into a faint, thin hum that spreads across the vast expanse of the night. You are not fighting the sound. You are giving it so much open space that it can no longer find anything to strike. Perhaps you might notice that when you stop providing a rigid surface for the world, the need to win the argument begins to dissolve on its own. The person who spoke sharply to you. You cannot reach into this room to make the bell ring. Only your own defensive posture keeps the hammer moving by allowing your chest to become soft and porous, like dry clay that absorbs the rain. You let the residue of that difficult exchange pass completely through you without leaving a scratch behind. You can return to this soft touch whenever you are ready. There is no penalty for drifting away, and no failure if the mind tries to rebuild its fortress a few minutes from now. Each time the loop starts again, you can simply notice the tightness, uncurl the hand, and rest your attention on the rim of the vibration. Let the image of the copper bell change very slowly now, fading into the dark texture of your blanket, leaving you with nothing but the immediate physical reality of this moment. The room around you remains dark and safe. The world outside continues its slow, unmonitored rotation, completely unbothered by the human dramas of the day. You do not have to heal your whole life tonight, and you do not have to decide how you will face tomorrow's challenges before you are allowed to close your eyes. Peace is not a distant mountaintop that you must climb through sheer force of will. It is the quiet layer of awareness that has been breathing beneath your exhaustion all along, waiting for you to trust it. In a moment, this story will take us deeper into the valley, showing us what happened when an ancient storm threatened to break the greatest monument of the monastery, and how a basin of dark oil revealed a way to live with a sensitive heart without becoming a prisoner to the wind. But for now, let yourself rest in this intermediate space where the sounds of the day are losing their shape and your body is becoming beautifully heavy, sinking down into the deep, welcoming stillness of the bed. And this is where the mind begins to soften. Several weeks passed after that midnight in the lower foundry, and the heat of the summer slowly gave way to the sharp, crisp mornings of early autumn. Junska returned to his daily duties at the monastery, carrying his water buckets, cleaning the stone pathways, and attending the long hours of silent meditation. He had practiced. The soft touch Master Koshin had shown him, and the sharp loop of the market square had gradually thinned out, until it was nothing more than a faint shadow in his memory. Yet, the young monk soon discovered that understanding a truth in the quiet of a dark foundry is very different from living that truth when the world changes its rhythm. The human mind does not become perfectly still after a single realization. Old habits of protection have deep roots, and life has a way of testing the softness we think we have found. The true test arrived when a sudden, violent tremor shook the mountain province, causing the earth to groan and the old stone walls of the monastery to crack. While no lives were lost, the deep shifting of the mountain bed slightly altered the foundations of the ancient wooden bell tower that stood at the highest point of the ridge. Hanging within that tower was the great temple bell, a massive 7-foot monument of dark bronze, cast generations ago by masters whose names had long been carved into stone. Following the tremor, a strange and distressing phenomenon began to plague the community. The subtle shift in the timber beams, combined with the restless autumn winds that swept through the high mountain pass, caused the great bell to hum continuously. It was not a clean, musical tone, but a low, heavy, droning vibration that never ceased. Even when the air seemed completely still to the human cheek, the invisible currents of the valley would catch the immense bronze body, causing it to sing with a constant mournful groan. Day and night, the low frequency rolled across the rooftops, vibrating through the wooden floors of the meditation hall, and entering the small rooms where the monks tried to rest. It was impossible to escape. The sound crept into their ears while they ate, while they walked, and most terribly when they lay down in the dark to sleep. The constant hum began to wear away at everyone's patience. The younger novices became irritable, the elders complained of headaches, and a heavy cloud of psychological exhaustion settled over the entire mountain. The monastery's chief administrator, the very man whose harsh words had once broken Junsuk's peace, called a meeting of the senior monks in the courtyard. Standing beneath the groaning tower, his face drawn with fatigue, the administrator declared that the great bell was ruined. He argued that the bronze had internal fractures from the earthquake, or that the spirit of the instrument had soured. He insisted that the only solution was to cut the thick hempen ropes, lower the massive structure to the earth, and use heavy sledges to smash the bronze into pieces so it could be melted down in the furnaces and cast anew. To him, an object that could not stop vibrating in response to the wind was a broken thing, a nuisance that had to be violently destroyed to restore order. Junsuk stood at the back of the crowd, listening to the iron tools clinking in the leather bags of the workmen, and a familiar cold tightness gripped his stomach. He looked up at the great bell, observing how its dark, ancient skin trembled invisibly against the grey autumn sky. He felt a deep, aching sympathy for the bronze. He recognized its struggle, because, for months, his own mind had been exactly like that high tower. Even the slightest breeze of an unresolved conversation, a cold glance, or a passing judgment would set his entire being into a perpetual exhausting hum that he could not silence. The administrative monks wanted to destroy the bell because they did not know how to live with its sensitivity, just as Junsuke had once wanted to tear down his own mind because he did not know how to handle his own deep feelings. Before the workmen could lift their ropes, Master Koshin walked slowly up the stone steps of the ridge, his old wool robe trailing through the fallen pine needles. He carried no tools, no axes, and no architectural diagrams. Instead, he pushed a low wooden cart upon which sat a single, wide, shallow basin made of heavy cast iron. Inside the basin was a dark, thick, viscous liquid that caught the dim light of the overcast sky like a sheet of obsidian. It was unrefined hemp seed oil, pressed from the autumn harvest, heavy and pungent with the smell of the raw earth. The old bell founder did not argue with the administrator, nor did he make a long speech about the sacred history of the bronze. He simply requested one day to attempt a remedy before the sledges were allowed to strike. The monks, desperate for any relief from the unrelenting drone, stepped back and watched in silence. Koshin called Junsuke forward from the crowd, signaling for the young apprentice to help him lift the heavy iron basin from the cart. Together, their muscles straining against the weight, they carried the oil up into the wooden framework of the bell tower, placing it on the floor, directly beneath the vast, hollow mouth of the hanging monument. Junsuke watched as the old master knelt on the rough timber beams, his knees sinking into the dry moss that grew in the crevices. Koshin did not touch the body of the bell, nor did he try to brace the wooden beams against the wind. Instead, he reached up to the leather turnbuckles that adjusted the height of the main suspension ropes. Very slowly, turning the wood just a fraction of an inch at a time, he lowered the entire 7-foot mass of bronze down toward the iron basin. He watched the space between the metal and the liquid with absolute concentration, his breath moving in a slow, rhythmic cadence that seemed to calm the air in the small room. "Lower it just enough," Koshin whispered, his eyes never leaving the dark rim so that the world can touch it without breaking it. With one final, precise turn of the wooden handle, the lowest, outermost lip of the great bronze bell made contact with the surface of the hemp seed oil. It did not submerge the metal, dipped into the dark liquid by no more than the thickness of a single blade of grass. The contact was so slight, it barely created a ripple on the surface of the pool. Yet, the very instant the viscous oil met the edge of the bronze, the immense, maddening drone that had filled the valley for weeks stopped completely. The silence that rushed into the bell tower was sudden and total, so deep that Junsuke could hear the distant rustle of dry leaves falling on the path below. The wind was still blowing through the open slats of the tower. The timber beams were still shifting slightly from the earthquake's memory, and the air was still alive with the natural currents of the mountain. The outer forces had not changed at all, but because the very edge of the bell was grounded in the heavy, receptive density of the oil, the micro vibrations caused by the wind could no longer accumulate. The oil was absorbing the friction as fast as the wind could create it, discharging the tension into the earth without altering the form, the weight, or the beauty of the bronze. The bell did not need to be smashed to pieces to find its silence. It simply needed a reservoir of deep, viscous presence to ground its sensitivity. Junsuke stood in the quiet tower, his fingers resting on the rough wooden railing, and a profound warmth bloomed in the center of his chest. He looked at the tiny line where the bronze met the oil, and he understood that this was the transformation he had been searching for. For a long time, he had believed that to find inner peace, he had to become like the administrator, wish the bell to be hard, unmoving, or completely dead to the environment. He had thought he needed to destroy his own sensitivity, to melt down his heart, so that nothing could ever make him vibrate with pain again. But looking at the silent monument, he realized that his sensitivity was not a defect, and his tendency to feel things deeply was not a spiritual failure. The young monk stepped out of the tower and looked down at the village in the valley, his breathing long and effortless. He knew that tomorrow the wind would blow again, and people would still speak with sharp, unthinking tongues, but he no longer felt the need to run away from the market, or to build a fortress against the world. He had seen that a sensitive mind can remain fully open to the breezes of life, provided it knows how to dip its lowest edge into the thick, dark reservoir of simple awareness. The change in Junsuke was small, almost invisible to the other monks who were busy celebrating the silence. But it was entirely real. He walked down the mountain steps with a softer stride, no longer treating his thoughts as absolute truths, but as ripples meeting a deep and forgiving pool. And this is where the mind begins to soften, the quiet that settled over the mountain tower. When the bronze met, the hemp seed oil is the very same quiet that is waiting for you right now in the space between your own thoughts. As you lie here in the dark, let your mind return to your own body, noticing how the bed supports you without any effort on your part. The world outside your room may still be filled with unpredictable winds, and the people in your life may continue to speak from their own places of confusion, anger, or hurt. We cannot always go back and fix the foundations of every interaction, just as the monks could not instantly undo the deep shifts of the earthquake. But we can look directly at the heavy vibrating drone that has been keeping you awake, and we can look at it with a new kind of understanding. Have you ever wondered why your mind chooses the middle of the night to replay those difficult conversations? It is because the ego treats an unresolved interaction like a threat to its very survival. When someone speaks harshly to you, or when you leave an exchange feeling misunderstood, a deep vulnerability opens up inside your chest. The mind, in its desire to protect you, immediately begins to build a defensive wall. It starts to rehearse the future, planning exactly what you will say the next time you cross paths with that person. It replays the past, picking apart every word to find a way to justify your choices or prove your worth. This endless rehearsal feels like safety, but it is actually the very mechanism that keeps your body in a state of high, restless alarm. Overthinking is not an act of wisdom. It is simply fear, wearing the mask of preparation. When we look at this pattern through the lens of Buddhist insight, we can begin to see the difference between the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is what the world brings to your door. The sharp comment, the cold text message, the sudden sting of criticism. This first pain is the wind catching the great bell. It is an inevitable part of being alive, a natural consequence of having a sensitive heart that interacts with other human beings. We cannot always control when the wind will blow or how hard it will strike the metal. But the second pain is what the mind adds to that initial strike. The second pain is the continuous, looping commentary that tells you that because this person misunderstood you, you are fundamentally unsafe, or you are not enough. The first pain is a brief event in time. The second pain is the enduring identity we build around that event. Slowly the teaching becomes personal. Look into your own chest right now and see if you can notice how much of your current fatigue comes from the original conversation and how much comes from the secondary echo you have been feeding. When we lie awake, trying to force our thoughts into absolute silence, we are behaving exactly like the administrator who wanted to smash the great bell with iron sledges. We look at our own sensitive, overthinking nature, and we judge it as a defect. We think that if we can just shame ourselves enough, or if we can just force ourselves to be stronger, the anxiety will finally stop. But trying to fix an anxious mind through self-judgment is like hitting a vibrating piece of bronze with a heavy hammer to make it quiet. Every blow of your internal criticism only creates a louder, more painful resonance, hardening the very walls that keep the tension trapped inside. The trap of human suffering is that we so easily turn our temporary hurts into a permanent sense of self. When a conversation leaves us feeling rejected, we don't just feel the passing wave of rejection. We begin to believe that we are rejected, that our worth has somehow been permanently diminished by another person's view of us. We wrap our identity around the echo, carrying it forward into the days ahead. Like a heavy piece of luggage, we are afraid to put down. We need their approval to feel whole again. And so we keep chasing their ghost in our thoughts, begging a memory to give us the validation we think we lost. But another person's opinion of you is never a reflection of your true nature. It is merely the sound of the wind moving through the unique architecture of their own limitations. Peace does not arrive because you have finally convinced everyone in your life to see you perfectly, nor does it require you to inhabit a world where no one ever speaks with a sharp tongue. True peace is found in changing your relationship with the noise. It is the realization that your mind does not have to be a closed, rigid chamber that traps every vibration. You can allow your awareness to become like that wide, dark basin of oil, deep, heavy, and completely receptive. When a difficult memory arises in the dark, you do not have to fight it, and you do not have to believe it. You can simply allow the very edge of that thought to dip into the spacious stillness of your breath, letting the thick presence of your awareness absorb the friction before it can turn into a storm. You do not need to alter the past tonight, and you do not have to heal every old relationship before you are permitted to let your eyelids close. The space with you has never been truly defined by the words that were spoken to you, just as the original beauty of the great bronze bell was never ruined by the trembling of the mountain. Your original nature is vast, unconfined, and entirely independent of the judgments of others. By letting go of the need to win the argument, you are not admitting defeat. You are simply refusing to spend your vital energy keeping a ghost alive in your bed. You are choosing to let the vibration run its course, allowing the frequency to thin out and widen into the immense dark sky of the room. If it feels right, let your body sink a little deeper into the mattress, acknowledging that for this one night you have done enough defending. There are no critics in this room. There is no audience watching your thoughts, and there is no tribunal demanding that you prove your value. You are completely safe to drop the psychological shield you have been holding upright all day. Let the muscles of your neck relax. Let the space between your eyebrows soften, and allow your breathing to slow down into its own natural, unmonitored rhythm. In a moment, this wisdom will come closer to your own life, showing you how to walk through tomorrow's interactions with an open heart that no longer fears the wind. But for now, let yourself simply be the deep pool that receives the night. a space where every lingering echo can finally find its way back to rest, and this is where the mind begins to soften. Now let this wisdom come closer to your own life, moving out of the quiet valley of the foundry and into the actual moments that await you when the sun rises tomorrow. We often believe that ancient teachings are only meant for mountain peaks or silent meditation halls far removed from the clutter of our modern schedules. But the true arena for this softness is not a monastery. It is found in the middle of a crowded morning commute, during an unsettling meeting with a supervisor, or in the quiet panic that arises when a person you care about leaves your message on read. These are the modern mallets that strike the surface of your day. And it is here, in these unglamorous moments, that you are invited to choose a different way of relating to the noise. Think of how we navigate our digital lives today, carrying a small glowing screen in our palms that connects us to the thoughts, moods, and judgments of thousands of strangers. When you open your phone and find a cold message, a subtle dismissal, or an unresolved conflict, it acts as a sudden, sharp blow to your nervous system. The metal of your mind is struck, and instantly, a vibration begins to ripple through your chest. In the past, your immediate habit might have been to check the screen every few minutes, looking for reassurance, seeking a correction, or crafting an endless string of explanations to repair your standing in the other person's eyes. This compulsive checking is simply your hand reaching out to grab the ringing copper bell with force, trying to strangle the uncertainty out of the air. But, as we saw with Junsuke, that tight grip only drives the painful frequency deeper into your own muscles, keeping you in a state of hypervigilant friction, while the rest of your life passes by unnoticed. Perhaps you have spent years walking through the world with a heavy, droning vibration humming inside your ribs, while on the outside, you keep a polite smile fixed upon your face. You may be deeply tired from pretending to be okay, from carrying the exhausting expectation that you must always be clear, always productive, and always approved of by those around you. When you sit in a meeting or stand in a kitchen, nodding along while your chest feels like a massive bronze monument caught in an autumn gale, you are consuming your own vital energy just to keep the internal chaos hidden from view. You might even find yourself comparing your inner turbulence to the calm, shiny surfaces of the people around you, assuming that everyone else is made of solid stone while you alone are a fragile instrument shaken by every passing breeze. But the truth is that everyone you meet is a sensitive bell, navigating the same shifting weather of reality. Many are simply exhausting themselves by trying to hammer their own metal into an artificial silence. Consider what happens when you find yourself lying awake at night, feeling behind in your life, comparing your timeline to an invisible calendar of success that someone else invented. The mind begins to strike itself, generating a painful hum of self-criticism that asks why you haven't solved your problems yet, why you are still carrying these anxieties, or why you can't just be happy. In these moments, you are treating your own sensitive nature like the administrator who wanted to smash the great temple bell into pieces with heavy iron sledges. You look at your own overthinking as a broken thing that must be violently corrected or shamed into submission. But your sensitivity is not a defect, and your capacity to feel the impact of the world is not a design flaw. You do not need to melt down the architecture of your heart to find peace. You simply need to change where you allow the rim of your mind to rest. Peace is not something you must earn through a lifetime of flawless performance, nor is it a reward that is granted only after you have resolved every misunderstanding in your relationships. You are allowed to rest tonight without earning it. You are allowed to let your eyes close, even if there are 10 emails left unanswered, even if someone is currently holding an incorrect opinion of you, and even if your future feels as cloudy as a valley mist. Resting while life is incomplete is not a failure of your discipline. It is the highest form of spiritual maturity. It is the willingness to say, the wind is still blowing, the bronze is still capable of vibrating, but tonight, I am placing the edge of my awareness into a deeper pool of stillness. Tomorrow, when the first difficult interaction arrives, you might practice the wisdom of the oil basin in a very small, practical way. When a sharp word is spoken to you, or when a wave of sudden anxiety rises in your stomach, see if you can take a single, slow breath before you answer. That brief pause is the moment the bronze dips into the heavy, grounding liquid of simple presence. In that space of one breath, you can remind yourself that the thought passing through your mind is merely an event in time, not a command that must be obeyed. A feeling of tightness in your throat is just a temporary visitor, not a permanent definition of who you are. You can care deeply about your life and the people in it without gripping their reactions so tightly that you crush your own peace. You can allow others to have their storms without providing the rigid inner walls that turn their wind into your permanent drone. This shift in how you live does not mean your life will suddenly become perfect, or that you will never feel the sting of rejection again. The great bell in the tower was still a sensitive piece of bronze, and it still registered the movements of the mountain air. But because it was grounded at its lowest point, it could receive the world without turning that reception into an agonizing, perpetual torment. You can become steadier, softer, and clearer not by hiding from the market square, but by cultivating an inner reservoir of deep, uncritical awareness that can absorb the daily friction of human existence. You can listen to a criticism without absorbing it as your truth. You can feel a wave of grief without building an entire identity around it. As you lie here in the deep safety of the night, notice how the urgency of tomorrow's problems begins to lose its shape when you refuse to provide an argument for it to strike against. The people who may judge you tomorrow are currently asleep. The tasks that feel so heavy are currently nothing more than abstract ideas waiting in the dark. There is absolutely nothing you can solve from this bed tonight, and no amount of mental rehearsal will ever clear the fog from the path ahead. Let the memory of today's friction run out of air, allowing the frequency of your overthinking to widen and thin out until it dissolves completely into the dark texture of your room. You have fought hard enough for your dignity today. You are safe enough now to let the shield drop and trust the quiet gravity that knows exactly how to hold you without your effort. And this is where the mind begins to soften. The darkness in your room has deepened now, absorbing the last remaining contours of the day, leaving you enveloped in a stillness that requires nothing from you. The air has grown thick and beautifully cool, carrying the quiet rhythm of the latter night hours across your face. Let your breathing drop into an even slower, more effortless cadence, a soft rise and fall that feels as natural as the tide moving against a dark shore. There is no longer any need to watch your thoughts, no longer any need to guide your awareness or practice a specific technique. The time for understanding has passed. The stories have served their purpose, and the teaching is ready to sink away from the surface of your intellect, dissolving down into the quietest layers of your heart. Feel how your body has become beautifully heavy, sinking steadily down into the deep, welcoming embrace of the mattress. Imagine that this bed is like that massive, iron basin of dark hemp seed oil, resting beneath the great temple bell. It is a vast reservoir of complete acceptance, an unmoving pool of deep, viscous quiet that is perfectly designed to receive you, exactly as you are, right now. Every tiny micro-vibration of tension that you carried through the hours of daylight, every lingering knot of anxiety from a sharp remark, and every exhausting, defensive pulse, still humming in your muscles, can simply dip into this darkness. The mattress absorbs the friction of your life as fast as your mind can release it, drawing the residual heat away from your skin and grounding your entire frame into the silent earth below. The words that hurt you have no density here. They have no solid body and no iron tongue to strike against your peace. In this darkness, the conversation that kept you awake has lost its form, thinning out until it is nothing more than a faint cloud passing across a midnight valley. The person who spoke sharply, the face that looked coldly upon you, and the public squares where you felt exposed are all miles away, completely erased by the immensity of the night. You do not have to finish the argument tonight, and you do not have to protect your reputation from the ghosts of yesterday. Let the outermost edges of your mind soften completely, uncurling your awareness from the past, allowing every memory to drift away like steam rising off a cooling kiln. Let your eyes rest deeply behind their lids, feeling the heavy, velvet weight that presses down upon your brow, releasing the last, subtle lines of vigilance from your face. Let your jaw drop slightly away, allowing your throat to open and become completely porous, so that your breath moves through you like the wind passing through an empty, windless bell tower. Your hands are perfectly still beside you, open and empty, no longer gripping the handle of any conflict, no longer trying to force the rest of the world to understand your goodness. You are allowed to be misunderstood. Tonight, you are allowed to leave the puzzle of your relationships completely unresolved while you rest. The universe does not require you to be perfectly vindicated before you are permitted to sleep. Listen closely to the silence that has taken over the room. A vast, velvety expanse that has no borders and no walls. This silence is not an emptiness. It is the original nature of your own mind. The undisturbed sky that remains whole and clean, no longer touched by the thunderstorms of the day. The noises of human life may rise and fall. The mallets of criticism and praise may strike the bronze of your ego from time to time. But they can never damage the spacious awareness that contains them. You are the space, not the sound. You are the quiet valley foundry after the fires have been extinguished, when the charcoal has turned to grey ash and the mist has come down low enough to touch the grass. Let the final frequencies of overthinking decay very slowly now, pulsing softer and softer in the dark, the waves becoming wider, thinner, and increasingly distant. Each slow exhale carries a tiny fragment of the old resonance out into the open night, diluting the tension until the sound runs entirely out of air. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. You do not have to mend the broken foundations of your world before the sun returns. The earth is turning in absolute quiet, carrying you forward through the dark without your assistance, nurturing the roots of the late blooming bamboo beneath the soil, waiting for the conditions to be ripe Trust the darkness to do its work. Trust the heavy gravity that is pulling you down into the deep, unmonitored waters of sleep. There is nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to fix within the chamber of your chest. The copper has grown cold. The oil has absorbed the final tremor, and the iron basin has swallowed the echo whole. Let yourself slide completely over the edge of wakefulness, dropping down into that absolute, unvibrating stillness where words lose their meanings, and the self dissolves into the dark. What if the peace you have been searching for all day was never hidden in the perfect answer, but was quietly breathing right here, beneath the very thoughts you finally chose to put down?